How long is a church service? The average church service lasts about an hour. In many churches, there is a place and time where the people gather for coffee and fellowship, Bible study, or group meetings that could extend the time there to 2 or more hours. People usually stay as long as the service lasts. How long is a church service? Church services are a great way to commune with God and reach out to those in your community. But what is the average length of a church service? The answer may surprise you. On average, churches last for about an hour and 15 minutes. However, this time period can vary depending on the type of service that is being held and how many people attend. This article will discuss the various lengths of church services as well as why they differ from one another. What is a church service? A church service consists of a gathering of people to worship God. Many churches gather on Sundays, but some also meet during the week for Bible study and fellowship activities. These events are held in what is known as the sanctuary or building where the church meets. However, this may vary depending on your local area's culture. Sometimes small groups will host services at members' homes. How long is a church service? The main purpose of a church service is to give worship to God and learn more about Him through the preaching of His Word, or Bible. Many churches also have a time for baptisms, weddings, and funerals. As you can see, there are many reasons why people might attend a church service. Church services usually last around an hour and 15 minutes. However, this varies depending on the denomination of the church as well as the activities that are taking place. For example, if your church has a large choir and orchestra, the service will likely last longer than one without these additions. How long is a typical church service? The average church service is about an hour long. However, many churches have shorter services and some have longer ones. It really depends on the church and what they are doing. The typical church service includes songs. There will be a mix of hymns and contemporary songs. Prayer. There will be prayers throughout the service. Reading. The Bible will be read aloud. Sermon. A sermon is typically preached by the pastor or another leader in the church. Communion. Some churches will offer communion to their parishioners. Offering. There may be an offering taken during the service that is used for church expenses like staff and building costs. There are many different types of church services, including traditional service. This type of service follows a typical order with hymns, prayer, and scripture reading in addition to preaching or teaching. Contemporary service. The focus is on contemporary songs and styles rather than traditional ones found in traditional services. Evangelistic meeting/conference. These meetings tend to last all day long as they begin early morning until late afternoon or evening depending on what time worship begins at your particular church. Many churches also have special services for things like Easter, Christmas, and Lent. These services can last longer than an hour since they include extra elements like drama or music. Services vary from church to church, so it's important to visit a few before deciding which one you want to attend regularly. You may find that you prefer announcements. There will be announcements made during the service. These can include things like upcoming events, birthdays, and updates about church leadership. Some additions to that time window is coffee. Some churches will serve coffee and donuts after the service. Food. Some churches have meals following their services, especially on Sundays. Bible classes. Some churches will have classes following, before their service. The duration of a church service varies by denomination and culture, but generally lasts for about an hour on average. Ministry meetings. There may be other church meetings held during the week in addition to Sunday morning services. Children's church. Some churches have a separate service for children that is shorter than the adult services. Typical children's church service length, 60 minutes. It many times runs at the same time as adult services. Workshops. Some churches offer workshops or study groups during the week that are free to join. Visitors. If you're visiting your local church, they may have special visitor services that don't take place on Sunday morning. Gospel. Evangelistic meetings. The history of church services. There's a history of church services? Yes, indeed. The modern world has witnessed many changes in the way churches function and worship their God or gods. Some churchgoers are unaware that there was ever any kind of change at all to how we do things now. It is important for us as members of these institutions to learn about our history so that it can inform our future decisions on what we may need to change going forward, or not. In the beginning, there were only spontaneous meetings held in people's homes. Services consisted of singing, praying, and sharing bread and wine. The first church building specifically designated for Christian worship was built in 312 AD by Emperor Constantine I in Rome. It was called the Basilica of St. John Lateran. Worship services have been conducted in a variety of languages over the years, including English, Latin, Greek, German, and Spanish. Churches began to use musical instruments to accompany their hymns and prayers during the Middle Ages. These instruments included organs, trumpets, drums, and cymbals. Church architecture has evolved over time to create a sense of awe and reverence among worshipers. The earliest churches were small, Circular buildings called small basilicas churches began to build various additions and extensions onto their structures as the congregations expanded over time. Roofs became steeper, walls thicker, and windows larger in order to let more light into the sanctuary where services are conducted. The first Christian church service was held on Christmas Day of 34 AD by St. Paul and other disciples of Jesus Christ at Ephesus. In this particular case, it was not a religious gathering but rather just a meeting with new friends who also believed his teachings about God being one for all people, including non-believers. It is thought that he may have had some wine during this meal, which led him several years later to write about the importance of moderation for Christians. Church buildings have been used by all kinds of religions over time. Some examples include Christian, Muslim, and Hindu. The most common uses, however, are Catholic, Protestant, especially Baptist churches, and Jewish congregations. What did ancient churches look like? Church buildings have changed and developed over time. In the early days of Christianity, churches were often underground or in secret locations for protection from persecution. These buildings would have been small with very basic features such as a table to hold bread, which was used during their sacred meals, sometimes called Holy Eucharist. Some of the earliest buildings looked more like houses, while others had large open spaces inside for worshippers to gather. Over time, the design of churches started to become more elaborate with features such as stained glass windows and towering spires. Father, grandfather, minister, missionary, deacon, elder, author, welcome to our family. View all posts.